Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. It's been a while since we've gotten together. I think our learning in Atfilos today should also be in the schus of ending this terrible conflict in Israel with the minimum loss of life as possible. But it's a terrible situation. In any event, we will move on. Torah is itself a salvation. Speaking of Torah, which is our topic today, I want to deal in very broad terms with the whole topic of rabbinic authority. What are the scope of rabbinic authority, the limitations of rabbinic authority, how it works, where it comes from. And we're not talking about royalty, we're not talking about kings. We're talking about the spiritual leaders of the Jewish community. What mechanisms are in effect to determine or to define what those authority figures are or should be and how they come to be? And also, how much power do they have? Do the rabbinic authorities have sufficient power and authorization to create new laws, to initiate new practices, to do things that might even appear contrary to the Torah? How much power do the quote-unquote rabbis have? And it isn't just rabbis way back when, it's even today's rabbinic authority. So we have to start with the Torah. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in his wisdom, understands that there was only one Moshe Rabbeinu. And he nurtured Yehoshua to take over after him. And you know the beginning of Pirkei Avos. Moshe Kibel Torah Misian, Masar Yehoshua, Yeshua is Canaan, Nevi'im, and so forth and so on. Kind of broke down a little bit during the time of the Shoftim in Tanakh because you had kings who were good, you had kings that were bad, you had people that were worshipped over the Avodah Zarah. So it was leadership was very problematic in the time of Tanakh. If you are mathematically oriented, you know that the sign, the graph of a cosine goes up and down, right? Remember your high school geometry? Cosine goes up and down, that's Tanakh history. When they were Oved Hashem and they kept the mitzvos, they were up on top. Nobody could touch them. When they unfortunately fell and worshipped the Avodah Zarah, that's when they lost sovereignty. So it goes up and down, up and down. That's a cosine. But in the Torah itself, there's guidelines for how do you seek a leader, a religious leader? How do you pick, how do you select someone to lead the people? And what is that person's authority? What is it based on? So we have to look in Sefer Devarim. And the Torah is very, very precise. Ki polei mimcha davar lamishpat. If you have a question about a judgment, what the halacha is, bein dam ledam, bein din ledin, bein nega lenega, any type of issue of tuma and tara, any specific technical issue, bein nega lenega, divrei ribos bisharecha, any arguments that arise, you have any question at all, v'kamto v'alisa ela makom asher yivchar Hashem lakecha bo. So you go to the Makom HaMikdash, if there were one standing, and you basically you ask a question there. Who's there? Who's at the place, the central location site? Ubasa ela Kohanim el HaLeviim. The Kohanim and Levim were your first line. They were the guardians of the tradition. They knew what the practices were. The Kohanim served in the ritual aspect. Leviim, they were both teachers. And if that isn't sufficient, but the El Hashofet, and you go to a judge. Next line is very important. Asher Yehiyeh Bayamim Hahem. Whoever the judge is at that particular time, whatever time period you live in, whether it's in the Midbar, whether it's in Eretz Yisrael during the time of the Nevi'im, whether it's now, whether it's 100 years from now, you go to the Shofet Asher Yehiyu Bayamim Hahem. V'darashta v'higidu lacha eis dvar habishpat. You'll ask your shilas, and he'll give you an answer. It doesn't end there. I'm quoting from the Torah now. It's Perek Yud Zayin Psukim Chet to Yirav. V'yasisa al pi hadavar asher yagidu lacha. And you must do what that shofet tells you. From where the place where he's at. Asher yivchar Hashem. V'shamarta la'asos. And you should be careful to observe. Kechol asher yorucha. Whatever he tells you to do, you must do. You have to listen to the person to whom you go to ask a question. You can't go shopping around. It goes further. Al pi haTorah asher yorucha, based on the instruction that he will give you. Yala mishpat asher yomru lecha taseh. Whatever he tells you to do, again, you shall do. I'm just giving you straight psukim from the Chumash. Lo sosur min hadavar. Do not depart. Don't do otherwise than what he tells you. Asher yagidu lecha yamin usmol. Left or whatever he says, you got to do. And the Gemara goes one step further. Even if he tells you your left is your right and your right is your left, it may not make sense to you. You know, one of the things I often tell people when you're discussing halacha, and a person will say, it doesn't make sense. I say, you're missing two words. It may not make sense to me. Those two words are very important. The Torah says, whatever your shofet bayamim hahein, whoever the ruling authority is in your time, in your place, that's who you have to go to. Now, the Gemara goes on in a lot of detail on these psukim. Tremendous discussion because the whole system of the rabbinate and teachers are based on these psukim. Now, there is no such position in Judaism as a rabbi of a community. That was invented in the Middle Ages. Synagogue rabbis are a medieval invention. The only reason it came about because you needed somebody who knew how to learn. Somebody to conduct a funeral, somebody to shecht, somebody to do a wedding. You don't need a rabbi to do a wedding. You don't need a rabbi to do a funeral. You don't. But if you knew the halachos, you could do it yourself. You could marry yourself, so to speak. You could perform the marriage ceremony yourself. I mean, when the level of learning decreased because of the Crusades, because of the Inquisitions, whatever the various reasons were, and the yeshivos were destroyed, and there weren't as many chachamim locally, because what you did was every shul had rabbanim who were part of the local yeshiva, and you had a question, and you went to the yeshiva and you asked, "What are the guys learning? What's the halacha?" You didn't have shul professional rabbis; didn't exist. It only began but those professional rabbis that eventually became synagogue rabbis, or a dayan of a community, or a chief rabbi of a city. These are the shofet asher yiyeh b'yamim hahem. These are the authorities that you go to. Every congregation now have a question, you go to your rabbi. And if the rabbi doesn't know, he'll go to his rabbi. And if he doesn't know, he'll go further up the chain. Somebody should have an answer. But this is the nature of rabbinic authority. But it's guaranteed. Yes.
Excuse me, but I missed something. My phone disconnected for a minute. Why is it necessary for the Torah to state the Kohen who will be and those times? In other words, isn't it necessary? Wouldn't it suffice just to say you shall go to the head of the base bin or go to the Kohen? Why say in that time?
All right, because the Torah is very, very smart, and the Torah is very open-ended because it knew, Kadosh Baruch Hu knows that things are not always going to remain static. Things are going to change. Communities are going to change. So in every generation, in every age, there's always going to be a need to have an authority figure someplace. A person who is knowledgeable, and that the Torah is setting it up. The Torah knows the future. The Torah is setting it up. There'll be a time where you won't have a Moshe Rabbeinu, where you won't have a Yoshua, where you won't have Zekanim and Shoftim. So you go to the Shofet Asher Yiyeh at that time. And the Gemara goes even further. The Gemara says, Yiftach B'doro Kishmuel B'doro. Yiftach wasn't the greatest tzaddik in the world, but he was a Shofet at that time. And Yiftach B'doro, he was the Shofet Kishmuel. He was like when Shmuel existed, he was the Navi. But at this time, Nebuch, the times have changed. People aren't as they were. You go to who's in charge now. We'll get to how we determine who's in charge, but and also the extent of their authority. I mean, there's a lot of literature on this. In general, introductions to books are very important. The introduction of the Rambam to Mishnah Torah, very worthwhile reading. It's available in English, simple Hebrew. And he lists the chain of tradition from Moshe up to his day. Every rabbi, and you also have a very famous, the Igeres Rav Shiur Gaon. Rav Shiur Gaon was one of the last heads of the yeshiva in Babylonia, roughly in the 10th century, somewhere around there. And he was asked, the communities in North Africa were struggling with the Karaite movement, denied Torah Shabbat Peh. And they asked him, help us defend our rabbinic tradition, give us the Shalshelas HaKabbalah, give us the chain of tradition, rabbi after rabbi, and explaining why Torah Shabbat Peh is as important as it is. And it's a classic document. Again, it is available in English. It's a great, and it lists generation after the generation from his time, from time backwards to Moshe Rabbeinu. Every leader of every generation. It's a great, great source. You also have a Tshuva Chavtes of the Marshal, do the same thing, listing all of the leaders of every generation. Now, the key question is, how far does this authority go? Can they introduce new legislation? Can they do something against the Torah? And you also, this halacha of allowing us to go to the leaders in each generation and allowing them to make innovations sometimes in halacha. Well, let me ask you the question. I mean, you can answer it yourself. There are certain mitzvos that are not biblical. They're not biblical, that we do. We light Hanukkah lamps. We read the Megillah. Okay? We say, Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al bikra Megillah. Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. How does that make sense? Hashem did not command us to light Hanukkah licht. Hashem didn't command us to read the Megillah. Yeah.
If shofar, which is in Torah, which the rabbis.
Well, I'll come to shofar in a moment. But based on this concept, because the rabbis have the power to create certain things, and these two examples prove the fact that it's considered vitzivanu. It's considered in the broader category of what Hashem says, that you should listen to the shofet asher yiyeh b'yamim hahem. Whatever the rabbis decree in your generation, that becomes the halacha. And in certain cases, it even becomes biblical. And in certain cases, they can even uproot a biblical commandment. Like we just had, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we didn't blow shofar. Torah says, blow shofar at Rosh Hashanah. How could the rabbi say, we're not going to blow shofar today? They had that power. He said, because you might carry it to Rabbim, you might bring it to somebody to learn how to, whatever reasons might be. The same thing about Megillah. Megillah, if it comes out on Shabbat. All these things, the rabbis have the power to do certain things. Now, you might want to argue, are the rabbis today like the rabbis of yesteryear? And the answer is, it's irrelevant, because this is what you have. And you can't always say, well, the rabbis of the previous generation were so much greater. That may be true, but it's irrelevant. You go to where the authority is in your time. Yeah.
We can go so far take the second day of Yom Tov and Pesach, and you make a Seder, and you're going through all the rituals, and you're making brachos there, that you can say is a bracha of Batala.
Yeah.
That's how far the rabbis had the power to do that.
The whole business of Yontif Sheni, sure. There are many, many examples. There are many, many examples. Now, in addition to following the authorities that are in your generation, the Torah also ends lo yosur, that you can't ignore. You can't say, "Oh, I'm not going to." Well, who is he? I mean, my Rebbe was from the old country. He knew what he was talking about. These guys today, I don't have to listen to them. Can't do that. Torah says lo sosur v'nadover yaminu smol. They are your authority figures, whoever they may be, and whoever you accept upon yourself as your rabbinic leader. That's who you listen to. And if you have a question, you don't go shopping around for a psak. It's also wrong. Yes, ma'am.
But there are so many different authorities, so many different rabbanim, different Jews follow. So you don't have any central.
Okay, good question. Excellent question. Who do you follow? There are so many rabbinic authorities. So, in an ideal situation, you've spent 20 or 30 years learning in a yeshiva with a Rebbe. He's your Rebbe Mufak. He's the person you spend most of your time with. He's who you learn from, and that's who you go to with your questions. Okay. Most people today are not going to spend 20 years learning in a yeshiva and have what they call a Rebbe Mufak. So you join a synagogue, and you have what they call a Morad Asra. He's the local teacher. He's the teacher of your place. Unless you have a relationship with another rabbi with whom you grew up, with whom you learned, the rabbi of your synagogue is the person to whom you go with your shilas. Unless you have a seder in a yeshiva and you're learning on the side. For example, there are a number of people in our community who are retired who learn in different yeshivas around town, Passaic, other places, and they have a relationship with the Rosh Yeshiva. And they could go to that Rosh Yeshiva if they have a shilah, even though they're a member of their shul and the rabbi is their rabbi. If you have a relationship with Rabbi Yudin, if you have a relationship with Rabbi Markowitz, then he is your rabbi. And if he doesn't know the answer, he will ask his rabbi. And that's how the system is supposed to work. It's not, this person is the Gadol Hador, and I'm going to go straight to him. Now, sometimes your rabbi will go straight to him if he doesn't know the answer. It all depends on the nature of the relationship, the nature of the question. This is a very, very important issue. How does a person become an authority? How do you become a gadol? Not every rabbi is a gadol. We accept it. But he is your rabbinic authority. To become there's no school for gedolim. Gedolim emerge. They emerge either through their writings or through their teaching. When I graduated high school, a long time ago, so I got a scholarship to Yeshiva Kol Torah in Beit Vagan in Yerushalayim, and I really wanted to go there after high school. And this was in 1962. It wasn't a popular thing to do at that time, to go to Israel for a year. And my father, El Vashala, said, "You're not going to Israel, you're too young. That's it, you're not going to go." Who was the up-and-coming Rosh Yeshiva of Kol Torah at that time? A young rabbi named Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Had I had the opportunity to learn with Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who knows if I ever would have come back? My life trajectory might have changed completely. And he became one of, quote unquote, the Gedolim. Literally. Everybody quotes him. He wrote many svarim. And he was a Rosh Yeshiva in a yeshiva. But the learning just propelled him to the top. Every Rosh Yeshiva, there's no school for Gedolim. You develop Talmidim. And people have conversations, and people learn from your Piskei Halacha. Rav Soloveitchik, Zeichat Tzaddik Livracha, only wrote one tshuva in his life. One tshuva. And that was saying it was better to stay home on Rosh Hashanah than daven in the shul didn't have mechitza. That was the only written tshuva he ever wrote, and he had it co-signed to Chaim Heller because he wouldn't do it on his own authority. Other than that, his greatness comes from his Chiddushei Torah, the way he analyzed Gemara, the way he taught a Shiur, and all of his publications, the ones that were most of them were posthumous because he didn't like to write while he was alive because his mind was constantly working. I mean, as a young man already, his brilliance was just unbelievable. But he didn't paskin halachos. That was not his role. Now, Moshe Feinstein was a posek. He was involved in more practical issues in every area of halacha. Soloveitchik, he asked him, I'm a Rebbe, I'm a Maggid Shiur, that's what I do, I teach. He didn't paskin halachos. I mean, if you ask him questions, one of the most coveted jobs in the world was to be his shamus. Person who would drive from places, the person who would sleep with him in his apartment, make sure all neat, because you have this, and you were a young kid at the time, but you're asking the Gadol Hador any question that comes to your mind, and he would answer it. If you go to a wedding with him, you ask him, that was a great job to have. And people have written books on their conversations. In any event, the authority figure that you have, now, the authority extends to the point where you can sometimes change or apparently go against halacha in certain cases. For example, let's talk about the whole institution of Shemitah, Shmitas Ksafim. Okay? The Torah says that in the 7th year of the cycle, so all loans are forgiven. So what's going to happen? People will stop lending money in the 5th and 6th year because they're not going to get paid back. So the Chachamim instituted something called prusbul. Prusbul means you can write a certain document where the Beis Din acts as your representative to collect them. It's a way around the law, so to speak, so that people will continue to lend money to those who need it. But it seems to be contrary to the Torah. There are many, many cases in the Gemara, many things throughout history where the rabbis did that apparently seemed contrary to halacha. And this introduces a whole new area called Migdar Milsa. When there is a need to literally to guard the fences, if there is an overwhelming need to do something, you can sometimes apparently violate a Torah value, but in effect, you are really maintaining a Torah value. There are certain, for example, Eliyahu at Har Carmel. Okay, Eliyahu at Har Carmel was facing the Via Habal, and to show that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was real, and the Nevi'ah Habal danced around and they cut themselves, all kinds of things, and the test was that fire should come from heaven to light their sacrifices. And of course, the Nevi'ah Habal didn't succeed. Then it was Eliyahu's turn, and he prayed, and a fire came down min hashamayim to prove to the world that God was God. He had no right to do that. How do you call on God to all of a sudden magically appear and bring fire down? And the Gemara discussed it at great length. Migdal Milsa Shani, because the need was so great at that particular point in time. But not everybody can do that. You have to have very broad shoulders to take on God. Eliyahu tried it. If he had failed, it would have been terrible. There would have been a catastrophe for the Jewish people. There are many, many cases. Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach was the head of the Sanhedrin, and the Gemara tells us that he killed 80 witches in one day in Ashkelon. He and his students went into a cave and they killed them all. How can you do that? If Beis Din administers capital punishment, in a very rare case, you only kill one person a day. How can you kill 80 people in one day? And the answer was Migdal Milsa, because they were witches, they were perpetrating a terrible fraud on the Jewish people, and they had to be exterminated. You need very broad shoulders to say that. There are many, many cases of Migdal Milsa. In a very technical article that was published in 1976, somewhere around there, the article is entitled Extra-Legal Juridical Prerogatives in Halacha. That means Horah Shah, where the rabbis introduced special temporary legislation. Okay, I wrote that article a long time ago. And I give a whole list of cases of all the things that the rabbis did, which apparently seemed contrary to Torah law. But they had that authority to do that.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I want to ask a question. You said you, quote, can't shop around for the answer that you want to your shaila. If you go to a rabbi and you respect him, then if you're going to ask the question, you have to accept his answer. But I do recall that on a previous class with you, you were discussing abortion, and there was a woman that went to a Rav
Right.
who was machmir, but
Yes.
he knew that there was another Rav who would be makil, and which is what the woman really needed, but he couldn't bring himself to give that heter.
Correct.
So he sent her to the other rabbi. How does that work out?
The key was that she didn't go, she knew the other rabbi's position, but she went to her Rebbe. And he said, go ask the other rabbi. That's the difference. Because had he poskined, he knew it would have been a terrible, terrible burden on this woman. So he didn't want to answer her question. For example, there are times, I remember when I lived in Florida, so in Florida, most people have their porch areas screened in, but a huge screen that covers the whole backyard so the bugs don't get in and so forth and so on. And I wanted to know, can I build a sukkah under that screen? It was like a window screen, but it was huge, covers the whole backyard area. And everybody in Florida has them. And I went to Rabbi Yudin, and he said, you know, I'm really not sure. Why don't you ask Rav Shechter? So he referred me, and I asked Rav Shechter, and he told me what to do. But when you go to your rabbi, and your rabbi says, I'm not sure, let me look it up, or I'm going to ask somebody, or this is who you should ask, that's different. But if you know that Rabbi X has a certain position, and Rabbi Y has a different position, and you really want Rabbi Y, but Rabbi X is your rabbi, you know, that could be problematic. You really should go to the authority that you have accepted upon yourself. As I said, in more traditional times, where people spent a lot of time learning with one teacher, and that became your Rebbe Mufam. But today, when people are not necessarily spending decades in a yeshiva learning, so you join a synagogue, and that rabbi becomes your Moreh D'Asra. He's the rabbi in that place. He is an easy authority that you go to. And if he's honest and he doesn't know the question, either he'll say, I'll get back to you, or let me ask, or this is who you should go to. There are certain rabbis who specialize in certain things. You know, it's hard for us, average people, to understand the breadth of Torah scholarship. There are people, for example, if you're going to be a rabbi in a community, way back when, you had to know the halachos of shechita, because how else are people in your community going to eat? Yeah, and smicha is based on hilchos shechita and treifus and malicha, which most people have no connection to anymore. Yeah, I went to a slaughterhouse and I studied the halachos. Am I an expert? No. But in days gone by, you had to be an expert in the halachos of shechita, in the halachos of mikveh. A fellow I know was sent to be a rabbi in Watertown, New York. Not a big Jewish community, but he had to build a mikveh. So he had to learn the halachos of mikveh. very, very carefully. So you have to know that there's shchita, there's mikveh, and there's all and Hilchas Shabbos, Hilchas Kriyas HaTorah. There are so many areas of halacha. You know, they used to have a joke at Tiferes Yerushalayim that in order to get smicha, all you have to learn is Hilchas Shabbos, Hilchas Kriyas HaTorah, and Rav Moshe's phone number. Because on Shabbos, there's not much you can do. But if a shayla come up with a Sefer Torah, you have to know that.
Rabbi,
There's so many. One second. There are so many areas you have to know, and there are people today in the world who are experts in certain things. There are people at the OU who are experts in the minutia of kashrus that you didn't even imagine. It's a separate expert there on fish, kosher fish. And there are people who travel around the world on these tuna fishing boats to make sure no dolphins are caught in the nets. I mean, it's tremendous. But when you have somebody who knows it all, it takes your breath away. There are people like that who know it all, who can quote you chapter and verse. It's staggering. It's staggering. I have been in the presence of people like that. It's scary. The former chief rabbi of Montreal, Pinchas Hirschberg, little man, who knew Talmud by heart with Rashi and Tosfos. Forget everything else that he wrote. His favorite game, whenever you'd meet somebody, he said, what are you, the assumption is everybody's learning something. What are you learning? Whatever Masechta you would say, he'd recite the whole Amud with Rashi and Tosfos.
Wow.
I once had a shaila, and I was very fortunate that for the short period of time that I was in the rabbinate, I never had to pass in the shaila. I had his phone number. And I had a difficult case of a marriage, the difficult case of a marriage, a ger and a giores and a person who said he was a kohen. Normally, you can't be Masada Kedushin like that. And again, the questionnaire that what I would ask prospective couples, I would go back several generations just to see any problems that might come up. I asked for Hebrew names and so forth and so on. Guy said he was a kohen and she was a convert. I really can't perform this wedding. And then, I'm not really a convert, but I just said, whatever this case was, I had a difficult child. And I wrote to, I called up Rav Hirschbaum, but of course, when you call up, you don't ask a question, I give all your sources to support your particular point of view. So I quoted a tshuva of the Ma'archei Lev, famous Rav of Warsaw, Ma'archei Lev, who agreed with my perspective on this question. And I wanted Rav Hirschbaum to agree with it. All he said to me was, in Yiddish, give a look at the Yashmotos. In certain books, very small print, after it was published, they add additional notes. So you go in the back of the book, and in tiny script, there was a letter written to the editor where this particular person disagreed with the psaka of the Varshavah Rav. It was Rav Hirschbaum. He must have been about 17 years old at the time. And they published it. That's all he said. They hung up the phone. Give a cook in the Hashmotos, and they hung up the phone. So you have such people today. They're rare, but you have them. And every Rav should try to be as knowledgeable as possible. Difficult. Today's rabbis are social workers and they're darshana. Everybody has their strength. And there are still people today who are experts. I remember Rabbi David Lifshitz, that's all, my Rabbi for a number of years. Rabbi Yudah and I were in the same shiur with him. He was known throughout the world as an expert in Gittin. And whenever I was in his house, for whatever reason, the phone is constantly ringing from all over the world. People had shilas about a get. They would call him. Other people who are experts in other areas. You have this fellow in Lakewood, what was his name? Expert in Eruv. Shimon Ida, who started out at YU. I remember him in the basement of YU. He went to YU, then he went to Lakewood, then became an expert. He wrote a whole bunch of books, but Eruv was his first major book. And he would go to be Maksha Eruv all over the place. There are people who are experts because halacha is, very, very big. And the authority is given Now, it doesn't mean that every local shul rabbi can paskin every shiloh. It doesn't mean that every local shul rabbi can change, quote unquote, the Torah. That is a Bezdin or a Sanhedrin, and there are Gedolim who can sometimes respond to contemporary issues. Rav Moshe Feinstein was one of the great poskim of the 20th century, and he broke a lot of previously held taboos. He was asked a question about artificial insemination. Is it permissible halachically? And there's two ways to do artificial insemination. It can be with the husband or through a donor. The husband, if the wife's cycle is such that it's very difficult to impregnate her, so you do artificial insemination with the husband's sperm. But if the husband's sperm is problematic, so can you use a donor sperm? And does the donor have to be Jewish? I mean, on very complicated questions. Nobody raised. Now, the fact is, artificial insemination was known in the rabbinic world for generations, primarily with animals. But human artificial insemination was a 20th century innovation. And he addressed the issue, and he said, I'm answering this person's specific question. Don't allow it to be used as a general heter. He responded to a question of one particular case, and of course, once he said it was okay, then everybody, the dams broke. However, there was a journal, I think it's still out, a journal, Hamo'or, it's a rabbinic journal, and the editor of that journal, plus many other rabbis, condemned him in the worst language. They called to all types of people that weren't fit to shine his shoes for criticizing his psak. But he had the courage to do it. It's not easy to fly against tradition if you believe the halacha is so and such and such. He had the courage to do that. He had very broad shoulders. He got burned for that particular tshuva. And as a result, he was very, very careful. He had an opinion about gas on Yontif. He had a chidush, he says. And he says, Etzli yesh chidush gadol. I have an innovative idea. But ein hazman ro'i legaloso. But I'm not ready to put it into writing yet, just yet. Because he got burned. He was afraid. Leadership is, for a leader, a shul rabbi, or a gadol batorah, or a rosh yeshiva, to come out and say something that is innovative is not always greeted with approbation. It is very, very broad shouldered. The Torah tells you every generation has its leaders, and those are the ones you have to listen to. But it does not come without risk to the person who's the leader, because you have to be bold. I mean, the whole notion of a yeshiva university, the whole idea of combining secular knowledge with Torah learning was in itself an innovation. They tried it in Europe, a few places, Hildesheimer and a few other places, Germany, and it was condemned by the traditional Rosh Yeshiva. How can you take time away from Torah learning? The original purpose of Yeshiva University was to provide English-speaking rabbis to the American community. And look at what it's become. You got medical school, you got graduate school, on and on and on and on. And a lot of people opposed yeshiva for that very reason. I once asked, and I'll finish with this, the traditional world, the yeshivish world, the Hasidish world, had tremendous respect for Rav Soloveitchik, but they never regarded him in the same way as they regarded their own Gedolim. So I asked my father's cousin once a question, and he said, he's a great man, but as gewend so long in Berlin, he spent too much time at the university. How much greater would he have been, from his perspective, had he not gone to university? On the other hand, most people would say that's part of his greatness. I mean, you need a dictionary to read his articles in English. Forget about the Yiddish that he used. In any event, just to summarize, there were so many pratim and details to go, but we didn't have enough time. The Torah very clearly tells you that there is a succession to Moshe and Yoshua. Whoever is in charge in your generation, that's the one you're required to listen to, no matter what he says. Now, we won't get into the issue whether he or she says it. That's a whole other class all by itself. But the authority is given to the local Mora, Elav Tishmo. You have to listen to him. In any generation, they have the authority to make the laws, to apparently sometimes even uproot a Torah law if it's for a legitimate purpose, and they have to make that determination. Very often when there's a major issue that comes up, rabbis will confer. In certain issues, there's unanimity. There was a famous controversy in Mount Clemens, Michigan. Not a big town, I heard Mount Clemens, Michigan. Mount Clemens, Michigan was an Orthodox synagogue. The town changed, as many suburban communities do, and they wanted to take out the mechitza. A whole book was published called Kedushas Beis HaKnesses, the Sanctity of the Synagogue, in Hebrew and in English, where they bring all the tshuvos, and that's what Masoloveitch included, where you have to have a mechitza in a shul. Because this is, what do they call it? Who was it that said this? I forget who, but the mechitza issue is not the most burning issue in Judaism. But when you're in a war, you fight the battle where the fight is. It may not be your most important objective in the world, but that's where the fight was. You have to address it. It's a war. So they've put together this whole book about the importance of mechitza, and they got letters from rabbis from all over the world. Hopefully, we won't have too many substantial questions, and more people will begin learning Torah so that they can find their way on their own. But if you have a question, you go to your rabbi, whoever your rabbi might be. It could be your rabbi, it could be your Rosh Yeshiva, whoever you have that relationship with. But if he doesn't know, hopefully you'll say, I'll get back to you, or I refer you to somebody else, because today it's very hard. There are people who know it all, but they're few and far between. And if your rabbi may not know the answer to your specific question, he'll find the answer, either by looking it up someplace or asking another person or telling you who to go and ask. So there are specialists, just like in medicine, you have specialists, there are specialists in halacha as well. So hopefully we won't have too many questions that come up, but if they do come up, you know where to go to get the right answer. Okay, not much more to talk about, but we'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Wally.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Wally.
Have a great day.